Hello there. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today. Frank, Scott, and Chris here on Wednesday, January 24th. Today on the show, we're breaking down Scott's second base and shortstop tiers. Plus, we had James Paxton signed with the Dodgers and Aroldis Chapman signed with the Pirates. Plus, we had some interesting tidbits from the weekend that we did not get to on Monday's podcast. So I do want to make sure that we have time for all of that, which means we're going to jump right in. We will start with second base tiers, and we will begin with the top tier, Scott, which we mentioned on the previous episode, the first rounders. One name at second base. That's right, Mookie Betts, who also has outfield eligibility, and it's now back-to-back seasons with 35-plus homers, 117-plus runs, 12-plus steals. The NFBC ADP is 5. You can quibble over the batting average, but it feels like Mookie Betts deserves to be a top 5 pick in both head-to-head points leagues and category leagues. I feel like you would agree, Scott.
Yeah, I do agree. He is my number 5 in categories leagues and points. I think he's a little bit higher. What's interesting about this is, okay, so other than that random year where Trey Turner was second base eligible, because he got traded to the Dodgers when they still had Corey Seager and retained second base eligibility into the next year. So other than that one year, you have to go back to Jose Altuve's prime, I think, to find a first round second baseman in fantasy. And now we get Mookie Betts there, who it sounds like this year, like second base is just his position. I don't even know if he'll play enough outfield to be eligible there next year. But for as long as we've waited for a first round second baseman, you probably shouldn't draft Mookie Betts to play second base, because second base is, as we'll see, pretty deep. A lot to like here. I mean, every infield position is pretty deep. Outfield is very much not deep. And so, versatility is nice. But if you are going to draft Mookie Betts in round 1, the plan at that point in the draft should be, okay, this guy's going in my outfield. And that's true whether it's a 3 outfielder league or a 5 outfielder league.
Something I've learned about outfield early on here in the process is that the elite, more than the elite, but, the top 24 or so, I feel pretty good about that at outfield. And then I really like late round options, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of the middle of outfield that doesn't feel so good. So maybe you want to get 3 outfielders kind of early on. And then if you play in a 5 outfielder league, you can grab some upside names later, but we'll save that for the outfield episode. Let's continue on with second base. And the next tier is the also elite tier, and it features 3 names: Jose Altuve, Ozzie Albies, and Marcus Semien. The aforementioned Altuve used to be a first-round pick. He's just kind of settled in now as like a 3rd, 4th-round pick the past couple of years. He is going last of this trio once again. And Chris, you will get the first word here on Altuve. Still provides batting average, power, and speed. He averaged 3.9 fantasy points per game in head-to-head points leagues last year. That was second best at the position behind only Mookie Betts. The clear knock on him is that, or knocks, he's getting up there in age. He turns 34 in May, and he has missed 21% of his games due to injury dating back to 2018.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the game logs, and it's like last year was the first time it really cost him.
And it wasn't entirely his fault. The hit by pitch in the WBC, it obviously could happen to anybody.
Yeah, before that, it had been like 20 to 35 games per year. I think the most he had missed was 38 in 2019, which obviously that's not great. But if you're still getting 30 homers and you're still getting a 900 OPS bat and you're still getting that 300 average, I don't know if it makes too much sense to ding Jose Altuve too much for injury, because, yeah, okay, he might miss a couple weeks. I don't necessarily know if I'd put the injury prone tag on him yet. But I when you're talking about this range of the draft, okay, we're slicing thin anyway, so maybe, move him below these other guys, but I think he belongs in that tier for sure.
I want to point out for Jose Altuve, and I understand He might be a little better in points leagues because the strikeout rate is so low. He might be a little better in points leagues than in Roto, but he contributes across 4 of the 5 categories in Roto, RBI being the exception.
Mm-hmm.
He contributes well. I am looking through it right now, and unless I'm overlooking somebody, Jose Altuve had the 5th most points per game of any hitter last year. So far and away, the most at second base. Well, okay, obviously Mookie Betts is one of the hitters, but we've already covered Mookie Betts is really more of an outfielder. 5th best among hitters. You got Betts ahead of him, Freddie Freeman, not in order necessarily. Betts, Freddie Freeman, Matt Olson, Shohei Ohtani, Ronald Acuna, of course. And then it looks like Yordan Alvarez is tied with Jose Altuve. So, look, I rank Jose Altuve second at the position. I think most people rank him more like 4th, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have him behind Albies and Semien. So that's why I tier him with those guys. I mean, also because I couldn't make the justification to draft Jose Altuve in the first round, and the tier above this one is the first rounders. But I tier him with Albies and Semien, feeling pretty confident that if I'm waiting till the end of that tier, Altuve is going to be the one I get. And I feel great about that if that's the case. I think he really, since the Astros sign stealing scandal, I feel like Altuve's consistently been one of the most underrated, undervalued players in fantasy.
Yeah, he had that, I believe it was in the shortened 2020. He had a down season, and then basically since then, he's just been awesome. So when he's on the field, I think that should remain the case. Yeah, it was in 2020. So
the one thing that all 3 of these guys have in common, but it's more true of Altuve than the other 2, is the underlying metrics are pretty mediocre. For all 3 of them, Altuve outperformed his expected WOBA by like 60 points last season, which is high even for him, although in the StatCast era, he outperforms it by 30. So you do expect him to be better than his numbers. He's a very pull-heavy fly ball hitter, so he maximizes the power that he gets. That home park helps as well. But if I was looking for a reason why Jose Altuve is underrated, I think it's probably that. It's just the you look at the expected stats and some of the projection systems built that stuff in, and he looks fairly pedestrian when you look that way. But we know by now,
13-year vet, and
right,
that's always been the case.
Yes,
and so at this point, just tune it out. I mean, really, it's always been the case for all 3 of these guys. They've been Albies has been so consistent in terms of production over his career, other than that year where he had a couple of broken bones.
Mm-hmm.
And Simeon's been a little more up and down, but in recent years, he's really leveled off, even though the data is underwhelming. So I think, look, I mean, second basemen in general, they're not as strong. They're not going to deliver those huge exit velocities, but these 3 have shown that the way they angle the ball off the bat still leads to big production.
We got some breaking news.
Uh-oh.
Rhys Hoskins to the Brewers.
Rhys?
$34 million. Sorry to the Jake Bauer hive.
Oh man, there was a rumor recently that Garrett Cooper was drawing some interest from the Milwaukee Brewers, and I have a few deep league shares. All right, I'll give you guys the option. Do we talk about Rhys Hoskins now, or save it for the news and notes?
Save it for news and notes.
Okay, so that is exactly what we'll do. Let's continue on here with the second base tiers. The near elite includes 8 names, so a pretty massive tier here. Nico Horner, Matt McClain, Ha-Sung Kim, Ketel Marte, Bryson Stott, Zach Geloff, Gleyber Torres, and Andres Gimenez, who is 1 tier lower in a head-to-head points league. And why is that the case? Well, he hit 15 home runs with 30 steals, which is obviously very useful, more so, I think, in a categories league. 5.2% walk rate, 2.7 fantasy points per game. Not ideal for that format. So again, Gimenez is a name that drops down in a head-to-head points league out of the near elite tier. Scott, Ketel Marte is someone who stands out from this group as the only one who won't offer double-digit steals. but he's still a fine player. He produced a top 60 overall season in Roto. He averaged 3.3 fantasy points per game, which was 8th best at second base. So he belongs to in this tier, but he just has a slightly different skill set from everyone else in this tier.
Yeah, he stands out in that way, but this is a diverse group of players in terms of what you can expect them to deliver. So it's a difficult tier to work with. I do think in terms of just overall output, they all belong in the same tier. Obviously, that's why I set it up this way. But you've got a no steal guy in Ketel Marte. You've got a no power guy in Nico Horner. You've got a couple of all around upside guys who only did it over half a season in Matt McClain and Zach Geloff. So there's a little more reason for skepticism with them. You have kind of a low power output, but not as bad as Nico Horner, and still good stolen bases, but not as good batting average as Nico Horner. A couple of those guys in Bryson Stott and Ha-Sung Kim. Gleyber Torres is sort of like Ketel Marte, and he's pretty much just power. There's a little more speed there with Gleyber Torres, but not a significant amount. And then, Andres Jimenez, I guess he's closer to the Bryson Stott, Ha-Sung Kim category, but certainly wasn't as good as them last year.
Now the thing that stands out among this group, if you're drafting based on tiers at least, Scott should have a lot of Zach Geloff.
I have an early mock draft.
He is. You look at ADP. I'm not looking at it since January 1st, which is typically how we do it at this point. But overall on NFC, since January 1st, 129.6. Nico Horner is 57.4. Matt McClain is 59.1. Now, I understand the gap between Zach Geloff and Matt McClain in their price to a certain extent, because Matt McClain was a more well-regarded prospect of the two, but I think that gap is probably too big.
Well, clearly I feel the same way. And as I've mentioned a few times, I come out with my rankings before there's really even any ADP data available. So that was one of the things that caught me by surprise, especially since it feels like throughout the second half last season, I was fighting people on Zach Geloff, me being on the low side.
Yeah.
And suddenly the new year comes and nobody likes Zach Geloff anymore. Funny how that happens.
And McClain is in the better situation in terms of it's a much better home park. It's a much better lineup. Mm-hmm. But it's not inconceivable that Matt McClain could have a stretch where he struggles and gets sent down or finds himself struggling for playing time. It's a lot harder to see that for Zach Geloff.
The strikeout rate was bad for McClain.
29%.
And it got worse. It got worse the longer he was up. So you wonder if his season hadn't ended in August, you wonder how that would have turned out if the batting average would have dropped to like the 260 range. It finished at 290. I think it probably would have. I think McClain's probably more like a 260 hitter, in which case he looks that much more like Zach Geloff. Mm-hmm. So
XBA for both of them right in the 250, 255 range.
So I think this is it's an interesting tier because I could see you playing needs more in a roto draft, especially, and singling out different players in this tier rather than just waiting till the very last one. I already broke that down. But it's also interesting because it spans such a large stretch of the draft that it really affords you the opportunity to wait, which is kind of the whole idea behind the tiers approach is, okay, Matt McClain is going this far ahead of Zach Geloff, but practically speaking, is he going to be that much more valuable? No. So you could afford to wait at second base and instead direct your focus to positions where the drop-off in talent is much clearer.
It's kind of interesting. Like there are 8 players in this range.
Yeah, in this tier.
They kind of all have an expensive versus cheap one. Right? Like Nico Horner, 57.4. Bryson Stott, 105.2. Matt McClain, 59.1. Zach Geloff, 129.6. Ha-Seong Kim, Andres Jimenez, 81.9. Like, and then Ketel Marte is just kind of his own thing. And I think he's the best hitter of this group. It's just the lack of stolen bases. And obviously the injury history makes it harder to jump on him. But like it just in terms of pure hitting ability, I think he laps the field in this group.
There have been a couple times already in mock drafts where my pick is up and I'm really gravitating toward Matt McClain because I do like the upside. I do like what he showed as a rookie last year. But then I see all these second basemen out there who could do similar things and I know are going to be available much longer. And so I go a different direction. And I have yet to regret that, but you know, it does. Drafting this way does pretty much guarantee I'm not getting Matt McClain or Nico Horner. And so you have to be okay with like, that's your favorite sleeper or breakout candidate or just somebody you have to have. Then, you know, that's, I can't imagine tiering him with the group ahead here, like Marcus Semien and Ozzie Albies, but you're probably just not following the tiers approach if you're doing that. One other thing I want to bring up about this very large tier, because tiers kind of like rankings. I'm constantly massaging them throughout draft prep season, and I don't feel like it's ever perfect, and things are going to change. That's why different versions come out over the course of draft prep season. You look at this near elite tier, and I talked on the last podcast how I like my tiers to line up between positions. So if a player's in the near elite tier at second base and he's dual eligible at third base, I want him in the near elite tier at third base. But the names in the near elite tier here: Nico Horner, Matt McClain, Ha-Seong Kim, Ketel Marte, Bryson Stott, Zach Geloff, Gleyber Torres, Andres Jimenez. Compare that to the players in the near elite tier at third base: Manny Machado, Ellie De La Cruz, Nolan Arenado, Royce Lewis, Ha-Seong Kim. So Ha-Seong Kim is near the front of the near elite tier at second base. He's near the back of the near elite tier at third base. And I don't know about you.
I prefer that third base group a lot more.
Right. So
there's a lot of risk in this group.
I'm wondering if I need to. I'm wondering what I need to do about
You
that.
need another tier.
Do I need to skip a tier? As
Maybe.
we get deeper into second base, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's not really a near elite tier at second base, unless I'm just going to put Nico Horner and Matt McClain in it, which I'm not terribly inclined to do, because then I'm eliminating a lot of the ability to wait there that I've enjoyed to this point. I'm wondering if I just need to skip that near elite tier at second base.
That's where I'd go.
Yeah, those are all fair questions. I did. You guys talked about a lot of players at a lot of different points throughout that time, but one thing I did want to point out: the difference between Matt McClain and Zach Geloff. And this doesn't explain why they have a 70-point difference in ADP, because that probably shouldn't be the case. But Zach Geloff's underlying plate discipline is a lot scarier, for whatever that's worth. 16% swinging strike rate. That's compared to 10.5% for Matt McClain. 75% zone contact for Zach Geloff. That's 85% for Matt McClain. So those are two pretty distinct differences, which I think lower the floor quite a bit for Zach Geloff. But again, I don't know that it explains the 70 pick difference between the two.
Yeah, I think McClain kind of toes that passive versus patient line a little bit. If I remember correctly, he had really, really low swing rates on both in zone and out of zone pitches.
Yeah, and it was weird because Matt McClain walked a lot in the minors, but didn't really walk too much in the majors too. So I think there will be an adjustment for him. I don't know if it's just he'll be more aggressive overall, or maybe some of that passivity will turn into walks for Matt McClain. But something will probably change for him. The next best things tier features 5 names: Luis Ariz, Nolan Gorman, Jonathan India, Tommy Edman, Brandon Lau. Like the previous tier, I mean, all different kinds of skill sets that you're looking for. Luis Ariz, we know, mostly batting average, not much else. Gorman and Brandon Lau, when healthy, premier power at the position. Jonathan India and Tommy Edman kind of offering a little bit of power and speed within this tier as well. Luis Ariz, so unique because he technically finished 86th overall in categories leagues last year, but it was so front-loaded by batting average. He was the single biggest batting average contributor in fantasy baseball last year, but was barely a positive contributor in any other category.
Not even barely. If you look at the Fangraphs auction calculator, Luis Ariz was worth $15.5 last season. This is based on his actual performance. He was worth $15.5. $17.6 of that 15.5 came from batting average.
Yeah.
If you can do the math there, and
yep.
Yeah, he's a sub-replacement level fantasy player in 4 categories. And then he is far and away, because he never walks either. So he gets that massive at-bat number that also helps your batting average. One of the hardest players to figure out how to value. And it's completely team dependent, I think.
And there is a way to value him where if you draft some early round hitters that, kind of slack off in batting average, and Adolis Garcia comes to mind, Kyle Schwarber, maybe even a Matt McClain who, I guess the jury is still out on what he'll do with batting average. Luis Ariz can kind of fit a team mold like that. But in a categories league, I think it has to be very specific where you're going to get him.
Here's what I think you don't do with Luis Ariz, though. You don't draft him like he's going to hit 354.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's won a batting title back-to-back years. This last year, 354. The year before was 316. And he entered last year a career 314 hitter. So, just mathematically speaking, 354 is an outlier. It's very hard for the math works out in such a way that it's very hard for a hitter to do that. In fact, we almost never see it in the modern game. And maybe the shift ban makes it a little more possible, but I think more realistically, 315, 320 is what you're looking at for Ariz, which still makes him a standout in the category, but not superhuman.
Yeah, we already saw it last year. In the second half, he hit 314.
Yeah.
And, I remember getting some flack in my rankings when I had him outside of the top 12 at the midway point of the season. It was, well, he's hitting 380. And it's like, yeah, but he's hitting 380 to just barely sneak into the top 12 at second base, right? Like that's the thing, is that it's not that Luis Ariz isn't valuable when he's hitting 370 or whatever it is. It's that when he's hitting 320, which is what I think the ATC projections have him for, 319, he comes out as like barely a top 10 option there. And it's only because of his batting average.
And even if you look at Ariz and you think, all right, his skill set lends itself to a points league. He averaged 3 fantasy points per game on the nose, which was tied for 13th at the position, which again is solid, but not necessarily a standout. So proceed with caution.
It's going to be worse if he doesn't hit 354.
Yeah,
exactly right. Let's take our first break. When we return, I do have some pushback on where Scott has ranked Thairo Estrada. We'll do that right after this.
The biggest event in sports is coming to the entertainment capital of the world. CBS Sports HQ will have you covered every minute leading up to Super Bowl 58.
CBS Sports HQ at the Super Bowl,
getting you set with all the critical analysis you need.
This league is decided by quarterbacks.
We showed a lot of character in that moment.
Great perspective, Josina.
It's the moment you've been waiting for all season long. Ready, set, Vegas.
Welcome back in. We continue on with second base tiers. The next one is the fallback options or option. Just one name, Thairo Estrada. And I mentioned before the break, I do have some pushback here for you, Scotty, because last year I was definitely skeptical. I had Estrada written up as a bust. And what did he do? He came back, basically had the same season as he did in 2022, but did it in even less games. So he hit 271, 14 homers, 23 steals in 120 games. Has hit 260 or better, exactly 14 home runs, 21 plus steals, 2 years in a row. The StatCast data is bad. I realize that. But he kind of has this Isak Paredes thing going on where all of his home runs went to the pull side. They're left field or left center. So while we can't really explain the power using those metrics, I think, him pulling the ball as much as he does kind of explains that. And so I kind of feel like he should be in a similar tier as Tommy Edman, maybe even a similar tier as someone like Andres Gimenez. I don't know that there's a huge difference.
You could sell me on Edman a lot more than Andres Gimenez, because I think the batting average gap in the best case scenario for those three players, I think it's significant. I think Andres Gimenez has a lot more batting average potential than the other two. And I think if you look at what Andres Gimenez did in stolen bases down the stretch, it seemed like he really figured out how to take advantage of those new rules. And I think there's a lot more stolen base ceiling there for him than for Estrada, especially. They're a similar type of player, those three. I think I have them in separate tiers. Is a reflection of their upside relative to each other more than anything else. But here's what I want to say, and this is, when I was saying earlier about what do I do about the tiers at second base, because it seems like the near elite tier isn't as strong as at third base. Maybe I should just skip the near elite tier. Part of that was because I saw Thairo Estrada there in all alone in the fallback options. And I'm like, well, is he really that much better than Tommy Edman or Nolan Gorman or Jonathan India or any of those guys I have in the tier ahead of them? So what I'm thinking here is maybe I skip the near elite tier at second base, bump the Nico Horner, Zach Geloff tier down to the next best things, bump that Luis Arraez, Nolan Gorman tier down to the fallback options here with Thairo Estrada. And maybe that's the fix. To do another comparison between two positions, that next best things tier where you got Luis Arraez, Nolan Gorman, Jonathan India, Tommy Edman, Brandon Lau, that same tier at first base is Christian Walker, Tristan Casas, Spencer's tier, Spencer Torkelson, Yandy Diaz, much better, right?
Yeah.
That's got to be the fix. Either. Yeah, I don't like the idea of skipping the near elite at second base because it makes it feel like there's a bigger gap at that position than you're going to see in actual drafts, because Nico Horner and Matt McClain go pretty early. But maybe it's just that Nico Horner and Matt McClain are overvalued, because I don't think they are significantly better than Zach Geloff and Bryson Stott.
McClain's on my bus list, which I think is coming out next week.
Chris has his writing all over the place.
I wrote them 3 weeks ago, so I have no idea.
It's coming out at some point. The last resorts tier at second base, 10 names: Ryan McMahon, Edouard Julien, Jorge Polanco, Brandon Drury, Davis Schneider, Whit Merrifield, Jeff McNeil, Gavin Lux, Brendan Donovan, Jordan Westberg. Chris, a name in this tier of 10 that intrigues you most, maybe even one that can graduate from this tier this time next year.
Well, I'll go with the guy who was on my sleepers list, and that's Gavin Lux, who, look, I've been pretty skeptical of Gavin Lux, even going back to his prospect days, because he's just never shown the ability to hit lefties outside of, like, it was basically like a month and a half stretch in AAA, I think, where he hit lefties well. But other than that, he hasn't shown that ability. But, like, you look at the underlying data for Gavin Lux, and what you've got is a premium athlete who has shown some pop and some contact skills, not necessarily as much as we've hoped for. And then obviously last season, the torn ACL in spring training, he didn't get a chance to play, but he was someone who, like Mookie Betts, the Dodgers sent him to Driveline. He reworked his swing. He was working on getting more bat speed. I think the report was he was generating 6 miles per hour more bat speed than he had the previous year. We know he's a talented guy. We know that the plate discipline's been pretty good. We know he's a good athlete. It's just a question of getting more out of the bat. We didn't get to see it last year. Now he's got this massive drop in price. I think he's like outside of the top 250 in ADP right now. So Gavin Lux is definitely someone in this group that I'll be targeting.
Gavin Lux's ADP since January 1st is 268. And
The other problem with that is Brandon Lau is 262. And I like him, as Scott does, quite a bit more. Scott, you are muted.
Brandon Lau went undrafted in our latest Roto mock. Granted, it was just starting lineups, not benches not included, but like that should not happen. I mean, he missed some time with injury, but he still managed to hit how many home runs? Like 23, something like that, even during an injury shortened season. So I don't know why he's being so overlooked.
I think
21 home runs.
I think in NFBC drafts, it's because he doesn't provide any speed, and they're mostly deeper leagues where you need playing time, and Brandon Lau just hasn't been able to stay on.
And there's no IL spots.
He's missed 150 games over the past 2 years with recurring back injuries. So in deeper leagues, I could see why maybe you would pass on a player like that.
Look, playing without IL spots is dumb. That's first of all. If you're listening out there, don't do it. He stole 7 bases in 109 games. He was taking advantage of the new rules. He could give you a dozen steals.
It's not impossible. The final tier, the leftovers, 9 names: Luis Rengifo, Brendan Rodgers, Jake Cronenworth, Michael Massey, Geraldo Perdomo, Ahmed Rosario, Luis Garcia, Bryce Terang, and Jose Caballero. You guys don't get a single thing to say about this tier because we got to keep things moving. Couple things I wanted to promo before we get to the news and notes. FBT is a finalist for the Best Baseball Podcast category in the Sports Podcast Awards, and this is the final week to vote. Thanks to all of our listeners, we actually won the award last year. Now we're looking to go back to back. To help us bring home the hardware, you can find the link in the podcast and YouTube descriptions, or scan the QR code in the top right of the screen. Chris is helping out with the point there. The whole process should take less than a minute, and we'd really appreciate it. Thank you for your continued support. Next up, mailbag pods are starting up next week, and we have a new segment we're going to introduce, a prospect spotlight. So if you have a top prospect you'd like us to evaluate, leave a 5-star rating on Apple and drop a prospect's name in the review. We'll choose one player to highlight in our future mailbags. Lastly, our buddy Nick Pollock from Pitcher List has his annual PitchCon event starting today. When you're listening, Wednesday, January 24th. It's basically a 5-day live stream. Not literally, obviously there are some breaks in there, but live streaming for 5 days straight, the best baseball and fantasy baseball minds out there, raising money for the Sean M. Healy and AMG Center for ALS, excuse me. So I would say follow along, some great work there, donate, going to a great cause there with ALS. I will be on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, talking sleepers and bust at starting pitcher. Chris will be on Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, grading teams off-season moves, and Chris is also on Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time.
That's me. I'm Wednesday night at 9 p.m.
My brain is just mush. Scott is on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time, talking starting pitcher ADP battles. You can watch live at playback.tv/pitcherlist or at pitcherlist.com/pitchcon. All right, the news and notes. Well, we got the breaking news earlier in the podcast. Rhys Hoskins and the Milwaukee Brewers are finalizing a 2-year, $34 million contract with an opt-out after the first season. Rhys Hoskins did not play last year due to a torn ACL. Wasn't any type of arm-related anything. ACL, should be back, ready to go. Spring training, all good. If we look at Milwaukee's ballpark, over the past 3 years, they're 24th in just general offensive park factor. If you look at home runs, they are 8th in park factor, which sounds like it's something that should bode well for one Rhys Hoskins. Chris, you will get the first word here. It's, I think, an okay lineup. He's projected to back clean up, and it's a pretty damn good ballpark for home runs. So how do you feel about Rhys Hoskins to the Brewers?
It's a downgrade from, the Phillies in terms of both the lineup and the ballpark, I think, but we weren't necessarily expecting him to be back with the Phillies this year anyway. We know what Rhys Hoskins is. He's not quite Chris Davis with a K, but you look at the last 5 years of batting average, 246, 226. All right, that was bad. 245, 247, 246. You're going to get around 30 homers. You're going to get a decent number of runs and RBI because he gets on base. He's going to be a drag on your batting average, but hey, that's why Luis Arias exists, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think in a points league, Rhys Hoskins should also excel a little bit more. Obviously has walked a ton throughout his career. Scott, any initial takeaways here? Rhys Hoskins joining the Brewers. Sorry to those who were in on Jake Bauers.
Yeah, I mean, American Family Field, that's what it's called now, right? Has been
a bad name compared to Miller Park. Come on.
It is, well,
it's like, does Bernie slide into like a pile of insurance papers now or something?
It's a great place to hit, but its lighting is like it can create shadows with that retractable roof that sometimes players have a difficult time with. And so I think that's sometimes why players go there and don't see the boon that we expect them to have. Based on a 9-game sample of Rhys Hoskins at American Family Field, 5 home runs in 9 games. I think he's going to be fine there.
Okay. Fair enough. All right, let's move on to the other moves here. The Big Maple goes Hollywood. James Paxton and the Dodgers are in agreement on a 1-year, $11 million deal. Paxton has not been able to stay healthy. 96 innings pitched last year. Those were his most since 2019. But he was pretty damn good with the Red Sox. His first 16 starts, a 3.34 ERA, 114 whip, over a strikeout per inning. He averaged 95.4 miles per hour on the fastball, then imploded over his final 3 starts, a 14.9 ERA, 290 whip, more walks than strikeouts. And the fastball velocity was down 1 mile per hour to 94.4 miles per hour. Scott, any interest here in James Paxton to the Dodgers? And does it throw some cold water on Emmett Sheehan?
There's more competition now. We have heard already that the Dodgers plan to go 6-man this year. And understandably, given that, okay, they've got Yoshinobu Yamamoto, that's fine, we think.
Although he's never pitched every 5th day.
Yeah.
Okay. Rotations work differently in Japan. Generally.
Fair. And if the Dodgers follow through on this plan of a 6-man rotation, he won't have to now either. So in theory, he's fine in terms of durability, but you got Tyler Glass now, definitely not. Walker Buehler coming back from his second Tommy John surgery. Bobby Miller, who himself is a young pitcher and hasn't taken on a true major league starter's workload yet. So there are going to be openings throughout the season in this rotation, one would think, even if they are going 6-man. And if they are going 6-man from the get-go, there's still an opening for Emmett Sheehan. So I do like him as a sleeper this year. I know you have him as a breakout, Frank.
Yeah.
You could define him either way, I guess. And that doesn't really change for me, even though obviously there's more competition now. As for Paxton himself, I mean, you could make the case he's a sleeper too for the first, through the All-Star break last year.
Yeah, through the end of June.
Were phenomenal. He got the velocity back on his fastball and was getting tons of strike. What do somebody have the actual numbers here?
I went for 16 starts, but there are all different kinds of start and end points with Paxton. However you want to break it up.
So what happened? Okay, so I'll pull up the game log here, and okay, so through July 8th, his first 10 starts, he had a 2.73 ERA, 64 strikeouts of 56 innings, a 14% swinging strike rate, which is elite, and was basically a must-start pitcher in fantasy. He started dealing with a knee injury then that he kept pitching through. It didn't put him on the IL until end of
September.
August. Yeah. And his velocity dropped while pitching through that knee issue. He went from averaging 96 on the fastball to like 94.5 and got knocked around a bit. So, yeah, I think it's reasonable to assume the knee injury had something to do with that. Now, I mean, James Paxton's no model of health either. He's 35 years old now. You can't count on him to take on a big starter's workload, but he's also going to be part of that 6-man rotation. And so as long as you're not too invested in him and just you're treating him, you're assessing him on a start to start basis, as opposed to making him a focal point of your pitching staff. I think he could be a pretty good late round investment, especially with the Dodgers offense backing him.
We should probably address the GOAT in the room, right?
The GOAT?
They're going to re-sign Clayton Kershaw. He's not going to pitch until likely to the second half of the season, but
James Paxton won't make it that long. Come on.
well, that's the thing about all of this is like, oh, the Dodgers are going to have a 6-man rotation, really? With James Paxton and Tyler Glasnow and Walker? Like, they're not. Or they're going to have different 6 people in the rotation by May or June. Like that.
Gavin Stone's going to work his way in. Kyle Hurt's going to work his way in.
There are going to be plenty of opportunities for Emma Sheehan and everyone else because the Dodgers plan, I think it's pretty clear at this point, is just hope that Yamamoto, Glasnow, and Bueller are healthy by October, and they're probably going to. Oh, I'm sorry.
That cough just came out. There was no stopping it.
Oh, geez. James Paxton's ADP, by the way, I did want to mention it's 363.
Yeah, he's a perfectly fine late round dart throw.
My guess is that will climb for some reason. Players who are free agents just go really low in drafts. Like eventually they're going to sign. My guess is it could get as high as around pick 300. You see other pitchers there like Lance Lynn and Luis Severino. That kind of feels like the right range for James Paxton.
Yeah, you will see something similar with Hoskins, who's at 208 by now, but I think he'll move up into like the Isaac Paredes range. Probably makes sense, 175.
Yeah. I wanted to get to this, at least this last piece of news before we talk shortstops. Bit of a surprise. Aroldis Chapman signed a one-year, $10.5 million deal with the Pirates. And if you look at the adjusted salaries on, Chris, you would know, is it Spotrac or Spotrac, the website?
Spotrac, I believe.
Spotrac? Okay. Because I never knew how to pronounce it. I never heard anyone else say it. Spotrac. Chapman will be the highest paid player by the Pirates this season, which kind of took me by surprise. He turns 36 in February, but he could still pump it. He averaged 99 miles per hour on his fastball last year, his highest since 2017. Walks remain a huge problem, but it was a big bounce back season for Aroldis Chapman. Chris, the questions here: does Chapman affect David Bednar's value at all? Because the money is just kind of interesting to me. Or
we saw this last year. It's a repeat of last year. He signed with a bad team because nobody wants to give him a closer job. This time he got a bunch more money. I think last year he signed for like $3 million. This is just the Pirates hope that they get 2 or 3 good months out of him and then trade him to a contender. I can't imagine that they have any, like, if David Bednar gets hurt, great. We have the obvious guy to step up in Pittsburgh now in a way that we probably didn't before. Unless that happens, I don't think Aroldis Chapman is likely to matter for fantasy at all.
All right. Well, at the top of the show, I said we were going to get to all those other interesting tidbits. They'll have to wait another day. Let's take our final break. When we return, shortstop tiers here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Wake up to football highlights and news from around the world with the one and only Morning Footy team.
Rise and shine, football fans. Welcome to Morning Footy.
Start your all-day football craze with Morning Footy, part of the all-new Golazo Network.
All right, shortstop tiers. Here we go. The first rounders includes 3 names: Bobby Witt, Trey Turner, and Corey Seager. 2 questions on Seager coming your way, Scotty. Does he jump to the front of this tier in a head-to-head points league? And how much do you worry about the injuries with Corey Seager? Has only played 150-plus games once in his last 6 full seasons.
Yes, he jumps to the front in head-to-head points leagues. In fact, Corey Seager is my 6th overall player in head-to-head points leagues. And by the way, you asked me about Mookie Betts earlier. He's my 2nd overall player in head-to-head points leagues. Seager was one of those I mentioned, one of the few I mentioned with more head-to-head points per game than Jose Altuve last year. Or if I didn't mention him, I should have, because he was one of them. Okay, so the other question, do I worry about health with Corey Seager? Not really. Not really. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of his injuries have been, there was Tommy John surgery one year.
I think there was a hip surgery.
A hip surgery, yeah.
One thing I'll point out with the injuries is it was a hamstring last year. That is something that has lingered for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's not great, but I don't know.
It's worth noting he's only been on the IL 3 times in the last 4 seasons.
There you go.
It was a hamstring last year for 35 days. He had the hand injury last year. And then he had another, I think he got hit by a pitch in 2021, if I'm remembering correctly, right?
I don't remember off the top of my head. He did stay healthy for 151 games. Corey Seager did in 2022.
Yeah, he got hit by a pitch in May of 2021 and broke his hand.
My injury database is down right now. Come back, Pro Sports Transactions.
Yeah, that's
my only hope.
That's what I usually use as well, Scott. So we are in the same boat. Let's move on to the also elite tier, which features 2 names, Francisco Lindor and Gunnar Henderson. Gunnar finished his age 22 season batting .255 with 28 homers, 100 runs scored, and 10 steals after an awful first 2 months. Does come with some splits concerns. We didn't talk about this the other day, Scott, but Gunnar Henderson in his career versus lefties, 193 plate appearances, batting .199 with a .595 OPS, 69 WRC plus. Not nice. I asked Scott this question the other day. So, Chris, I'll ask you the same. Does Gunnar Henderson deserve to be in the also elite tier?
I think this is probably the right tier. I would say that there's probably one name that I would also include in this tier who's not here from the lower tier. But yeah, I think Gunnar Henderson belongs here. What he's shown, the split concerns are legitimate, and that's not super surprising for a young left-handed batter. The hope is that it improves, but you look at last season, expected WOBA and actual WOBA against left-handed pitching was sub 300. I think it was like 280 something. That's pretty bad. And so that's the key is, can he be a low 700s OPS bat against lefties, just plain not that good? Well, then actually there's room for him to grow even, but the underlying numbers are all very, very good. He hits the ball hard. He was hitting the ball hard even when things weren't going good. So I do think Gunnar Henderson might even have room to grow in terms of the stolen bases.
And it's not impossible for a young lefty to improve. If I am remembering correctly, Rafael Devers started off his career pretty bad against lefties, and he's kind of grown to be adequate. He holds his own. He's like a 7.
And that's all you need.
Yeah.
Lefties tend to have bigger split issues than right-handed pitchers. You see more lefty or you see more righties, so it makes sense. But yeah, he has to get to the point where he's just pretty good or pretty bad against lefties, and there's room for him to grow even from there.
Yeah, you look at Devers, his first full season in 2018, he hit .229 with a .619 OPS against lefties, and then by the very next season in 2019, he's an everyday player at this point. He hit .269 with a .744. I mean, that's exactly the growth that we would be looking for from Gunnar Henderson.
And the other thing you have to remember is we're dealing with very small sample sizes. Gunnar Henderson probably has 190 something plate appearances against lefties in his career, maybe 250.
193.
Yeah, like that's way too small a sample size to draw any conclusions on, even if I assume it's probably directionally true that he is going to struggle against lefties.
The near elite tier features 8 names: Bo Bichette, Ellie De La Cruz, CJ Abrams, Nico Horner, O'Neal Cruz, Matt McClain, Ha-Sung Kim, Xander Bogaerts. So we do get 1, 2, 3 names here that are also in the second base tiers: Horner, McClain, Ha-Sung Kim, Ellie De La Cruz. We spoke about a little bit the other day at third base tiers as well. But Scott, this is a tier that spans rounds 2 through 10, if you're looking at ADP. Bichette is like on the cusp of like rounds 2 and 3. But did you consider Bichette being 1 tier higher and maybe someone like Bogaerts being 1 tier lower?
Well, this is a mess. This is a mess because, we just talked about at second base. Okay, I'm not going to have Nico Horner and Matt McClain in the near elite tier anymore. Well, I have to extract them from the near elite tier at shortstop too. And meanwhile, you have, when we talked about third base, we talked about maybe me moving Ellie De La Cruz up to the also elite, which I could do. So this tier could go from very big to very small, with a couple of adjustments. And, you know, I don't know that in the long run, when we look at Fantasy Pros ADP, which combines all the ADP sources, I'm pretty doubtful about Ellie De La Cruz coming out as a second rounder when we do that. I think he's very high in NFBC ADP, but I don't think, I mean, I'm looking at it now. Yahoo has him 54th in early ADP. I think CBS has him even lower than that. I think they're probably pulling from our points league ADP data is my guess. But the point is, I think in the long run, Ellie De La Cruz might come out into the 40-50 range when you combine the ADP from all the different ADP sources. So, and yeah, understandably, there's going to be a wide range of thought on him given the risk reward profile. I come out a little more cautiously, I think, than others do. I don't have him higher than round 4, I don't think, even in Roto leagues. But I could still understand tiering him with Francisco Lindor and Gunnar Henderson in the also elite, with the caveat that I'd only do that in Roto leagues and not points leagues. I don't know. These middle tiers in the infield positions, I think it's already back to the drawing board for them because there's some stuff that needs to be sorted out here. And the fact there are so many multiple eligible players complicates things further.
Chris,
well, let me ask you this. Bo Bichette belongs in a tier distinct from Francisco Lindor and Gunnar Henderson, right?
I think so. Scott, you and I have had.
I don't. I think I have him. I have Bo Bichette ranked with those guys.
Is that the name you were referring to, Chris?
Yes.
Gotcha.
I thought he was referring to Ellie De La Cruz.
No, I mean, I have him ranked there, but I think it's probably okay if you want to push him down. It's certainly a risk reward thing.
So I kind of feel like Bo Bichette, now that we can't, 2-year trend now of us not being able to call him a base stealer, really.
Yes.
I think he's more Xander Bogaerts than not.
I think the quality of contact's a lot better. Like I think last year,
expected output.
I would say I think Bo Bichette's ceiling is closer to 30 homers, and I think Xander Bogaerts' ceiling is closer to 20. But like, I actually think Xander Bogaerts is kind of a decent value right now. In a like, they're not dissimilar in that I'm not sure you can necessarily project Xander Bogaerts or Bo Bichette to be a standout in more than one or two categories, but I think they'll both help you pretty much everywhere. You know, I think Bo Bichette's a more obvious helper in batting average, and I think the overall production will be quite a bit better. But like, I actually think Xander Bogaerts is a pretty decent value at like 110 or whatever his ADP is this year.
Yeah, Bo Bichette is one.
And Xander's working at Driveline this year.
Oh,
And I just looked it up because I thought I had seen something about that earlier in the offseason, but I'm just saying could get a bounce back year if we apply that narrative to guys.
Does Driveline do reconstructive wrist surgery, Chris? Because
they've got a lot of cool tools there, maybe.
Because Xander Bogaerts' wrist was a problem last year. I
Yeah.
think he had 2 cortisone shots, so hopefully he shows up healthy.
So,
I do think there is some big bounce back potential just for like the whole Padres lineup in general. But
yes,
save that for
back to Bichette for a second, because he had over 300, and he played 135 games. So there was a little mistime there with an injury, nothing significant, but a little bit that you have to factor in. So he ended up with 73 RBI and 69 runs scored. Again, not much of a base steal, only 5 of those. If you look at where he finished according to CBS's Roto rating system, Bo Bichette was the 80th overall player, while Francisco Lindor was the 10th overall player. And I mean, because I don't think those stolen bases are coming back for Bichette, who knows what happens with run and RBI, but you know, he's not getting on base at the same rate Francisco Lindor is. I don't know. I can't tier them together.
It is worth mentioning Bichette missed some time last year, 135 games played after 159 in each of 2021 and 2022. So that will affect the overall ranking. But even if he played 25 more games, was he going to jump 70 spots to where Lindor was?
No. I think he has to be better than he was last season, and I'm expecting that. I think the expected stats were a little better than his actual production. The run and RBI numbers are just both weirdly low in a way that I think we probably, it makes me think of Rafael Devers 2 years ago. Remember, he only had 84 runs and 88 RBI in 2022, despite having a really good season. Otherwise, he had basically the same season, arguably was a little worse in 2023. His OBP and slug were both worse, and his batting average, but he drove in and scored 18 more runs total than he had the year before. So that's one where I think there's going to be natural regression for Bo Bichette, where I think 90 runs, 90 RBI is a pretty reasonable projection, if not more.
And I think it is fair for him to get back on track. I mean, he turns 26 years old in March. So, he's just now, I guess, kind of entering the prime of his career. I think the only pushback I would have, Chris, is that Blue Jays lineup is bad, man. Like the top three right now, all right, you got Springer, Bichette, and Vlad, but they weren't good last year. They've lost Matt Chapman. They haven't replaced him yet. I mean, they've kind of been linked to Jorge Soler, but that hasn't happened. Even if they get Jorge Soler, is that enough? I don't know. I do have questions about the Blue Jays lineup here entering 2024.
I think that's reasonable.
Let's move on to the next best things at shortstop. 4 names here. Jackson Holliday, arguably the top prospect in all of baseball with the Baltimore Orioles. Dansby Swanson, Tommy Edman, and JP Crawford, who ranks 1 tier lower in a categories league. Why is that? Crawford only provided 2 stolen bases, and he looks like a head-to-head points standout. He had a .380 on base percentage and had 3 fantasy points per game. This is JP Crawford. That was tied with Gunnar Henderson, CJ Abrams, and Ellie De La Cruz. So really good in that format. Takes 1 step down in a categories league. Scott, one name here I wanted to focus on was Dansby Swanson. He's someone I actually kind of like in this tier. 10.9% barrel rate, ranked 5th among qualified shortstops, 77th percentile sprint speed. Now the Cubs have Craig Counsell as their manager, where he was pretty aggressive during his time with the Brewers in terms of just letting the team run. So I think the steals could be up for Swanson. And based on the barrel rate, it's pretty good power for a shortstop too. You are muted, sir.
I hadn't tried to say anything, and you already noticed that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I actually put that much stock in this. Craig Counsell is, going to turn the Cubs into the 89 Cardinals narrative or whatever we have going on. Like Dansby Swanson, he stole 20 bases once, right? Like he's just not that aggressive on the bases. I don't think going to Craig Counsell is going to change that really. He's not much of a source of batting average. He's basically a bad batting average Xander Bogaerts. And so that's why I have him tiered separately. But I'm really wrestling with this because it's hard to make the shortstop tiers and the second base tiers jibe with each other. I mean, I could reduce the shortstop near elite down to Bo Bichette, CJ Abrams, and O'Neal Cruz. But then I'm dropping Ha-Sung Kim, Xander Bogaerts, and Nico Horner into the same tier with Jackson Holliday and Dansby Swanson, and that doesn't feel right either. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's a mess. Everything is ruined.
All right.
Why do we even try?
I'm happy we're figuring that out here live on the podcast.
Well, it's it needs to be done. It needs to be done. I feel like we did this last year with the Tiers podcast too.
It's the only way to do it, man. We've got to talk it out. The fallback options, 6 names: Carlos Correa, Willie Adames, Anthony Volpe, Tyro Estrada, Trevor Story, Vaughn Grissom. Scott, the answer is obvious. You just move Tyro Estrada up 1 tier in both positions, and everything's fixed.
No. That's not fixed. Because then you're gonna tier Tyro Estrada with Xander Bogaerts. Is that what you're saying?
No, he wasn't in the.
Oh, we're talking about moving Bogaerts down because we
Oh.
got to get him out of the tier where CJ Abrams is. I don't know. I rank Nico Horner ahead of Xander Bogaerts. So if I'm gonna move Nico Horner down, like I'm saying I'm doing at second base, then Xander Bogaerts got to go with him, right?
I guess so.
Yeah, it's not so easy, is it?
It's not so easy.
Not so-
Outside of my
okay.
Tyro Estrada.
Tyro, you love Tyro Estrada, clearly. How valuable is a 260 hitting, 15 homer, 25 steal, 70 runs, 70 RBI guy, really? Because I just don't think that's that valuable.
Maybe it's just me focusing on the name Tommy Edman, but it just feels like they shouldn't be in different tiers.
I think that's a reasonable way to put it.
Yeah.
That is reasonable. I do think if either of them is going to steal 40 bases instead of 25, it's Tommy Edman. But he did not show any inclination to take advantage of the new rules. He kind of stayed just the same 30 steal guy he's always been instead of running a lot more like so much of the league did. And that's why he feels only as good as Tyro Estrada. I think there is more upside there, but maybe not enough that they deserve to be in separate tiers. That's kind of what we're working through right now.
Back to the fallback options, Chris, some clear bounce back candidates here, I think, potential bounce back. Not surely that they're going to bounce back, but Correa, Willy Adames, and Trevor Story. Correa still hit the ball hard. Plate discipline remains sound. He does have this lingering plantar fasciitis. Adames' quality of contact and BABIP plummeted last year. He's entering a contract year with the Brewers. And Trevor Story gets, his first normal offseason, I guess, since he was signed, but I guess even that's kind of not a normal offseason. But he rushed back from elbow surgery last year. Do you have any faith in any of those names bouncing back here?
I feel pretty good about Carlos Correa having a bounce back season. Now, what that looks like at this point for Carlos Correa is a different question. I think it's probably more like a 280 batting average, and it's probably more like 25 homers if he stays healthy with decent but not great run and RBI totals and absolutely no speed. I mean, he hasn't stolen a base since 2019, which is astounding. So like, is that a difference-making player? Probably not. But is it a player who has a lot of room for profit at his current price? I think it's more the latter. He is... How far down the list do you have to go in ADP? He is the number 25 shortstop behind the likes of Luis Rengifo, Vaughn Grissom, Ezekiel Tovar, who I like. But yeah, I think Carlos Correa bounce back is a pretty good bet.
All right, the last resorts tier at shortstop. 5 names: Jordan Lawler, Ezekiel Tovar, Jeremy Pena, Tim Anderson, who remains a free agent, and Javier Baez. We recently received an email from a listener named Samuel Isaac, who asked a very straightforward question. Why does Scott hate Ezekiel Tovar?
I wondered what name that was going to finish with. I thought it was headed for Jeremy Pena, but instead it went to Ezekiel Tovar, which is...
Why do you hate all of these players, Scott?
I mean, that question contains a premise that I don't agree with. So I don't know. I don't even know how to answer it.
All right, well, just talk about Ezekiel Tovar.
Why do you like him? I mean, he wasn't.
I don't know that
that useful last year. I know. Yeah. I know you don't, but I'm asking the emailer. Okay, so he hit 253, 15 homers, 11 steals in 153 games last year, and 695 OPS. The underlying data, nothing really stands out as, wow, there's a lot of room for growth here. I'm not saying he'll be a 695 OPS guy for the rest of his career, but I don't see anything that's going to lead me to believe he's bound to take a leap this year, other than the fact he plays half his games in Colorado. But that was also true last year when he was putting together the 695 OPS.
I will say, if you're going to bet on someone, this late in the draft, the 22-year-old, very recent top prospect who plays half his games at Coors Field is not a bad bet. Like we've given, I don't know, I feel like Ryan McMahon, it took longer for people to lose faith in. Like Ryan McMahon was still like a top 180 pick for like 3 years into his career. People kept giving him the benefit that he was better than Ezekiel Tovar was last year, obviously. But it's just to say that Tovar is still very young, 22 years old. He doesn't turn 23 until August. There's power and there's speed. How much of either of them is a fair question. But yeah, I think if I was going to wait for a middle infielder, Ezekiel Tovar is the kind of guy I would rather wait on.
But you could make an upside case for everyone in this tier. Jordan Lawler, an even better prospect than Tovar. Sure. Jeremy Pena, everybody loved him just a year ago. Not me so much, but a lot of
that's kind of my thing. Is like I didn't like him last year.
Tim Anderson, of course,
he's just got to sign. That's the thing for me is like once Tim Anderson signs, I'm gonna be trying to draft him a lot.
And Javier Baez, I'm sure you could still find some believers for him too. So, I think any of these are fine as a middle infield option in deeper roto leagues, like your 15-teamers. But I'm not predicting a breakout or bounce. I'm not going as far as to predict a breakout or bounce back season for any of them, even though you could. It's not the craziest thing to believe in.
And lastly, the leftovers. 8 names here at shortstop. Zach Neto, Mason Wynn, Luis Rengifo, Ezekiel Duran, Orlando Arcia, Geraldo Perdomo, John Birdie, Ahmed Rosario, and Bryce Terang. Wanted to give a quick shout out to Zach Neto, who was on my short list when I was thinking of sleepers to write up for this year. He hit 9 homers, 5 steals in 84 games as a rookie. Non-zero chance he can go 2010 in 2024.
A god in hit by pitch leagues. I love that.
8.8% barrel rate for Zach Neto. That would have ranked top 12 among qualified shortstops. Former 13.
A lot of good it did him.
He got rushed to the bigs. There's some upside here, Scotty. You don't sleep.
He was a top 100 prospect last year. I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but it's a blind faith sort of pick. I feel like same as Tovar. Somebody asked in the chat, wasn't Tovar better in the second half? No, he was worse.
All right. Well, we answered your question, Samuel Isaac, or at least we tried. We're going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball Today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.